Welcome to the Food Revolution Summit, where we explore how you can heal your body and your world with food. I'm Ocean Robbins, thrilled to be here with you for our next interview with Doctors Dean and Ayesha Sherzai. Dean Sherzai, MD, and Ayesha Sherzai, MD, are cutting-edge neurologists, brain science researchers, and best-selling authors of the books The Alzheimer's Solution and The 30-Day Alzheimer's Solution, the definitive food and lifestyle guide to preventing cognitive decline. They are co-directors of the Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma Linda University, directors of the Healthy Minds Initiative, and creators of the Neuro Plan, N-E-U-R-O, which is a customizable brain health program that utilizes technology and neurological research to empower users to improve their brain health. Dean and Ayesha host the popular Brain Health Revolution podcast and have been featured in the Sunday Times, O Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, and on ABC News, CNN, BBC Good Food, and so many other outlets, as well as many Food Revolution summits. In this interview, we're going to be talking with Doctors Dean and Ayesha Sherzai about the Alzheimer's and dementia epidemic and how they can be prevented with diet and lifestyle choices. We're also going to look at some of the specific foods and nutrients that have been shown to benefit brain health and how you can incorporate them into your diet on a regular basis. Dean and Ayesha are also, I'm honored to say, two dear treasured friends of mine and my family's. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having us, Ocean. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and your lovely audience about something that both Dean and I are very passionate about, which is brain health.
It feels like talking to the family as usual.
Yeah. Wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about why you have dedicated so much of your lives to addressing the root cause of the Alzheimer's crisis?
What we talk about is Alzheimer's, but it's actually much broader than that. It's about brain health. And that includes Alzheimer's, all the different types of dementias, strokes, mental health. Our non-for-profit Healthy Minds Initiative, its goal is to spread information, proper, meaningful, translational information in communities where we're devastated with all the brain health diseases. And there's a huge gap with what we know we can do and what's applied in the community. So it's critical that we speak about this devastating tsunami of brain diseases. Alzheimer's being just one of them affects 6.9 million people in the United States alone. Tens of millions of people worldwide, and this is going to grow massively in the next few decades.
So earlier in your careers, you were focused on looking for drugs to treat dementia, and you spent quite a bit of time doing cutting-edge research on that, and then you shifted focus. Can you tell us why?
Yes, there's a lot of great research that has been going on. There have been many attempts for decades to find a treatment for specifically Alzheimer's disease, which is devastating. But unfortunately, despite all the efforts and despite all the finances that go towards research, we haven't been able to, for a very long time, to find a treatment. Now, lately, there have been some that have been approved by the FDA to remove the causative bad protein, amyloid protein from the brain, but still the percentage of change that is seen in populations is very small. And during our careers, we were both involved in, specific research finding treatments. I myself was involved in neuroimaging research, specifically functional MRI images, to find out, how the brain functions and how we can detect cognitive impairment as early as possible. But it was so distressing to see all of these attempts and funds going more towards treatment. And there was this whole universe that showed us that if people were able to find their risk factors very early on and manage it with lifestyle, they could prevent this disease from happening in the future. And so we dedicated our life to actually find out and identify those risk factors, and for allowing communities to make good decisions about their lifestyles, to actually understand it better and to know early on what they need to do to prevent it from happening.
Can you tell us about some of the most comprehensive studies on food and health, like epidemiological research and clinical trials, and what these have shown us about Alzheimer's prevention?
What we found was when we were looking at clinical trials, when we were at UCSD and Ayesha at Columbia and other places, the entirety of focus was on a drug that would affect one protein that would potentially affect the disease process, which has not really panned out. So we started looking way back in 2008 and 2007, actually, looking at the data even back then. And even then, there was tremendous amount of data that showed that lifestyle had profound effect on Alzheimer's and all diseases, brain diseases. And one of the most common one of those was the Adventist Health Study. That's actually what took us from UCSD, which was the #1 neuroscience program in the country, to Loma Linda, to look at that population, which are people who live in a particular type of life. We'll talk about that. And the significant reduced number of dementia cases, and that was demonstrated in that. The same thing with when Ayesha went to Columbia University, the health and wellness program and the studies in Columbia, they definitely demonstrated the same thing. The Harvard study, Framingham study demonstrated the same thing. When we look at the California teacher study and looking at vascular disease and food, demonstrated the same thing. And when you look at study after study after study, it shows that lifestyle has a profound effect on not just abating the disease process, but definitely completely stopping the disease process in its course. That's why we came up with the number 60 to 90% of Alzheimer's is potentially at its optimal preventable. That's remarkable. This is one of the most devastating, the most expensive disease of them all. And whatever we do for Alzheimer's also applies to stroke and other dementias. And so it's a tremendous world of depth of information that's missing out there, because not that there's a nefarious intent. The mechanism isn't there in the clinical and hospital setting to truly translate lifestyle into people's lives. So there's a wealth of information that's almost like in an empty space. And that's where we actually started focusing on communities and translation.
And as far as diet is concerned, there is plenty of information to show that there are certain types of foods that can definitely prevent the prevalence or the incidence of Alzheimer's disease. We have studies on specifically greens, which you and I love, Ocean. I know how much you love kale. Blueberries, for example, and foods that are high in anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds. But we have tremendous data showing that specific dietary patterns can help prevent Alzheimer's disease. The kind of dietary patterns that have been studied extensively, they have specific acronyms and names. So the Mediterranean diet have been studied quite extensively. The MIND diet, which is a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. DASH stands for a dietary approach to stop hypertension. And the kind of dietary patterns, that prevent Alzheimer's disease, specifically when you look at it, these are not cultural dietary patterns. These are essentially a combination of different foods that are part of a scoring algorithm. So when you eat certain foods, you score higher, and that essentially translates into lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. And there are other foods, when you eat more of them, that deducts your score, and so you have a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. And when you parse it out and you look at these dietary patterns, the foods that are beneficial for brain are mostly plant-based. So greens, beans, whole grains, cruciferous vegetables, colored vegetables. When they say eat the rainbow, that's not just a cute phrase. It essentially means that foods that have highly colored compounds in them, like blueberries and sweet potatoes and strawberries and green leafy vegetables, they're very high in anti-inflammatory compounds. And the food that you put in your body determines whether your brain and your physiology is in a protective damage control mode or in a thrive and a growth mode. And these foods help us heal and help us prevent these devastating diseases.
Fascinating and fabulous. Now, in your own practice, you've seen a lot of people, including having the painful experience of having to diagnose quite a few people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia over the years. And you've also noticed that those with Alzheimer's and dementia often tend to follow certain dietary patterns, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what you've observed? Obviously, this isn't a controlled trial study here, but this is a pretty interesting body of research because you've seen a lot of patients over the years. Tell us about that.
In 1993, Paul Guillaume wrote a paper on Alzheimer's and the risk of food on Alzheimer's. And what he found was that those who ate meat, I'm talking about all categories of meat, chicken, fish, beef, all of them, and even fish, they had twice the risk of developing Alzheimer's as compared to those who ate plants. And that's a great population to study this because the Adventist Health Study has a large group of population that are plant-based eaters only. And that was remarkable because that was the data that came to us from a time where Alzheimer's was not being diagnosed as well. So there was actually a bias away from that statistics, meaning that if anything, if you truly looked at the data, it most likely was more pronounced than that. But at the minimum, at that point, it showed that there was a twice the greater risk of developing Alzheimer's than those that ate meats of all types. That was remarkable. And then when we came here, and we actually chose to come to Loma Linda, and we had a clinic for 5 years, and during that time, I actually collected data on nutrition, exercise, stress, sleep, and everything else. And in that population, you expect at least a third of the population that comes to you to be vegetarian or vegan, because a third of the population in that region is vegetarian and vegan. So by law of distribution, you actually expected of the dementia patients that came to me, 3,000 of them, at least a third of them to be vegetarian and vegan. In fact, more than that, because the vegetarian and vegans were Seventh-day Adventists, and they had a greater proclivity to come to Loma Linda, their own hospital, right? They're associated. So there was a bias to come to Loma Linda more, whereas others, they could go to other regional hospitals. And lo and behold, what we found was something remarkable. It wasn't 1,000 individuals out of 3,000. It was 19 individuals that were plant-based. And that number was, again, it's cross-sectional. It's not the optimal study. Optimal study is prospective and long-term, which actually there's no such thing because it would be too expensive. But a case-controlled study. But it was absolutely remarkable that out of 3,000 individuals, only 19 of them in a region where there's lots of plant-based eaters were vegan or vegetarian. And that prompted further research and further looking into this. And when we looked at other data, same thing, we would see the same thing. More plants, lower dementia and vascular and other disease risks, and more meat and processed foods and fatty foods, greater risk of dementia.
Now, you just said more meat and processed foods, and also you mentioned fatty foods. Now, there are some folks out there who are saying that the brain is mostly fat, therefore perhaps a high-fat diet is optimal for brain health. Where's the disconnect? Why are they saying that? What is the truth?
Thank you for bringing that up, because there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding in that realm. It is true that the brain is made out of fat. When you look at the dry weight of the brain, about 50 to 60% is fat. As a matter of fact, 57% of the brain's infrastructure is made up of docosahexaenoic acid, DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid. So it's important for us to include some fat, but folks need to understand that there are, fats are not all the same. There are good fats and there are bad fats. The bad kind of fats that have been associated with increased risk of Alzheimer's disease are specifically saturated fats and trans fatty acids. And these are found in animal products such as meats and high-fat dairy products, and even sometimes in coconut oil and foods that have coconut oil and palm oil. They're very high in saturated fats and they have to be reduced. There are multiple different studies that have shown that people who choose saturated fatty acids and they eat less polyunsaturated fatty acids, they have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Saturated fats actually increase our LDL cholesterol, which has been associated with the increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. So this link and this association has been repeated so many times in clinical trials and observational prospective studies and multiple different lines of research that it's almost becoming causative. Sometimes causality is questioned, But when there is repetition of data over and over and over again in multiple lines of research, you know that there's a very, very, very strong correlation between saturated fat intake and Alzheimer's disease. On the contrary, polyunsaturated fatty acids, or the good types of fats that are found in nuts, in seeds, in sometimes whole grain products, in avocados, and some other plant-based sources of fats, not coconut oil, I'm afraid. These are associated with good health. These are associated with lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. And so when you look at dietary patterns like the Mediterranean diet or the Mayan diet or the Adventist Health Studies vegetarian diet, when they consume foods that come from plants, fats that come from plants, they are associated with a lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. The one important fat that we need to consume on a daily basis are omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA. How do we get them? We get them from seeds like chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, from walnuts, from sometimes kale. And these are the fats that are needed by the brain to keep the infrastructure healthy and to keep it functioning properly. Dean and I conducted a couple of systematic reviews a couple of years ago, looking at the importance of DHA and EPA, which are omega-3 fatty acids, in the two bookends of life, for children's brain health and for elderly's brain health. And we found out that for people who may have some cognitive impairment later on in life, and for children that are growing, consumption of DHA is incredibly important. And sometimes if they're not getting enough of it from their diet, they actually have to consider supplementing. But those are only in cases when they need it, absolutely, from sources like algae-based omega-3 fatty acids, which have DHA and EPA in them.
Thank you very much for that. Considering that the brain is 57% DHA, as you said, and considering that ALA is not highly easily converted to EPA, which then has to be converted to DHA, not everybody converts efficiently. So it seems that, it's worth just underlining that in the vegan diet, or any outside of fish, essentially, algae and various relatives of algae are the only direct sources of DHA and EPA, and so hence the need to get them from algae-based supplements if one isn't going to consume fish. Would you agree with that? And also, I'm curious if you'd comment on, I believe it's DPA, which is kind of an intermediary of sorts.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's very important for people to know and to have that information to make decisions for themselves. In multiple lines of research, it's been shown that people who opt for a plant-based diet or a vegan diet, they have lower omega-3 index if they're not consuming the right kind of foods. And you're absolutely right that the conversion of ALA into DHA, EPA, and then DHA is very, very low. So you have to consume a whole lot of ALA-based source foods, such as seeds, for it to convert into an equivalent amount of DHA that would be beneficial for brain health. And sometimes people can't really meet that need. And DHA, getting a direct source of DHA from algae-based omega-3 fatty acids, is a very easy way to do it. Thankfully, especially living in the Western world, we have access to those kind of supplementation from an algae base. And studies have shown that there's really no difference between the DHA that comes from algae versus the DHA that comes from fish. As a matter of fact, this main source of DHA are algae. The fish consume the DHA in algae, and then, basically we use the fish as a middleman to consume, to get that DHA. So we can go to the source and get that from algae as well. And how do we make that decision? How do we know whether we are consuming enough DHA? There are certain lab tests that people can do, but just as a general rule of thumb, it's important to, focus on, foods that have higher sources of omega-3 fatty acids like seeds, nuts. And then at some point, there was a time when we were kind of against lab testing for their omega-3 fatty index, but if people can do it, if they want to know what their levels are, there's really nothing wrong with that, so that they could adjust. They can adjust and, opt for supplementation if necessary. Because at the end of the day, it is very important for us to consume DHA for brain health. And as far as DPA is concerned, It is important. It's an intermediary. We don't have a lot of evidence. We don't have a lot of research that clarifies the relationship of DPA and its conversion to DHA and brain health. But, I think hopefully we'll know more about it soon.
One other factor to be aware of, if you're a plant-based person and you're getting your omega from plant-based sources, if it's ALA, that conversion is also affected by what's going on in your liver. So if you're drinking alcohol, that's going to affect that conversion. If you're getting a lot of omega-6 foods, processed foods, which are packed with omega-6s nowadays, that's going to interfere with that conversion as well. So if you're going to go with a completely plant-based food source of omega-3, that's fine. I really don't think that the 5%, 7% conversion or 10% means anything if you're getting enough of it, and if you're making sure that you're not doing other things that are interfering with a biochemical limiting enzyme that's affected by all the omega-6 foods and processed foods you're getting, or alcohol and things of that nature that affects the liver.
Got it. Thank you. What about MCT oil? We talk about this periodically when I interview you, and there's sometimes a bit of new research, sometimes not, but there's never any shortage of people extolling the great benefits of it. Many of them, of course, also companies that are selling it. But do you think that MCT oil, which is, of course, highly saturated and extracted from coconut oil, what does the research show? Is there benefit here? Is it possibly beneficial or not?
So the studies that have shown us some benefit are very small. And small essentially meaning that they were short-term. They were tested for a very, short period of time on a small population. There were a couple of studies where individuals who were experiencing very mild cognitive impairment, when they were given MCT oil, they tended to have some improvement in their cognitive testing. Now, whenever you look at a specific item, whether it's a food or a supplement, and to find out its benefit for health, not just brain health, but for anything, it has to be conducted for a longer period of time so we can tell whether there are any side effects, whether there are long-term benefits, whether that benefit is meaningful. There are a lot of things that have statistical significance, but in real life, they don't really have any clinical significance. For example, just based on this conversation, MCT oil showed some statistical significance in improvement of cognitive testing. But does that mean that someone who had, for example, difficulty writing a check, were they able to write a check again? Not really. If somebody had difficulty with, for example, driving, were they able to drive again after they took MCT? Not really. So the change was very, very, very small in a small group of people. And you and I know that MCT, just like you said, is a highly processed, fractionated oil that is extracted from coconut oil. And it could potentially contribute to atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries, which have been associated with stroke, vascular dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. We really don't have long-term data that can potentially tell us that it is safe for people to consume. So we are not really recommending it at this point. We are open. We're open to data. We hope that this can actually be tested and replicated in other populations, and for different studies to use a standardized cognitive testing too. See, the results and the outcomes are also very important for it to be standardized. You can't just use a specific type of cognitive testing for one population and use another testing for another population. So, these are all the issues that are not there yet. And that doesn't give us confidence to be able to tell the audience and our patients and our family members that it is okay for them to consume MCT oil in case they have some memory problems.
Yes, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about mental clarity. A lot of people are using language like they talk about brain fog, which may or may not be a clinical diagnosis, but it is an experience a lot of people have. And do the same lifestyle and diet approaches that help prevent Alzheimer's also give us a clearer mind in the here and now, and tell us what causes brain fog, and also what are some solutions?
Yeah. So this is a very interesting concept, and this is something that's near dear to my heart because it's about consciousness. It's about attention and focus. Those are separate things. Attention is the first phase, a very superficial way of attending to something, very superficial. Focus is deeper version of that, taking a deep dive into a concept, taking a deep dive into an awareness or item or something. And you can all test this out. Right now, you don't know where you're sitting. You don't know what, the things around you, the sounds around you. But all of a sudden, you pay attention to my voice. Okay, that's great. That's attention. But then focus is when you're listening specifically to the words and going deeper. The reason I'm delineating this, because I think it's a great place to start for people to know that sometimes attention is affected by many things. Depression, it's an exhaustive list. Depression, mood change, lack of sleep, tension, anxiety, pain medications, other types of medications, stress, multitasking. The list can go, and even physical medical problems like thyroid disease and B12 deficiency and so on and so forth. So the list of things that can affect attention is exhaustive. So when somebody says that they have this brain fog, one of the first things I do is that, are you able to attend things or you just can't maintain deep levels of thought? That's a separation. It's important. And that separation tells us if it's anxiety, depression, all of these things. And going through that list, it's almost always that you kind of figure out, okay, there's one dominant feature that's affecting that more than others. There's a change in medication. There's a change in their cycle of sleep. There's a change in there's attention. There's all of these things. And it's becoming more ubiquitous for two reasons. One is because we're becoming aware of this concept of brain fog. People lived with it. And I remember I've seen nearly 20,000 patients. That language wasn't there, but the symptoms were there when you actually extract it from people. The second reason is that there's more anxiety, there's more depression, there's more medication out there, there's more lack of sleep. There's actually data that shows that we're sleeping less and less efficiently over time. So all these things contribute to this consequence to very important concept in our life, which is focus and attention. Because without that, memory is affected, executive function is affected, your ability to solve problems is affected. So I wanted to approach brain fog in that more comprehensive way, because if you can do something about it first, some tests, talk to somebody to figure those out, and then also to look at it in a way that you can have control over it.
Speaking of comprehensive, you have developed the Neuro Plan. Can you tell us what Neuro stands for and what are these pillars of creating the foundations for a healthy brain life?
We think it's an incredibly important 5 pillars. And although much of the pillars are the same as what you would apply to heart disease and diabetes and everything, there's 2 pillars that are very different. And we approach it differently. And I'll go over these. And behind much of this is the 4 pathways of disease: inflammation, oxidation, glucose dysregulation, and lipid dysregulation. So N is nutrition. And simply stated, more plants, more unprocessed foods.
No.
Sorry. And making sure that you are eating more vegetables and greens and vegetables, all of that stuff, and less processed foods like meats and cheeses and especially fatty cheeses and all of these things, as well as sugar, not carbs. Carbs are fine. It's processed carbs and things of that nature. On the exercise, oh my goodness. I would say that even though we both have degrees in nutrition, exercise is profoundly important. We're beginning to realize that exercise is the most important thing you can do on a daily basis. And it doesn't have to be marathons or anything else like that, but a regular regimen of exercise that gets the heart beating fast and gets the muscles stronger, especially leg muscles. The combination, one of the only things that's shown to grow the brain at any age is exercise. So you have to start an exercise regimen. That's the E. U is unwind or stress management. And why don't people talk about it? Because they think that there's not much you can do about it. You can. Identify the good stressors in your life, the bad stressors, and then systematically increase the good and reduce the bad. And that's not a simple-minded, statement, a Pollyanna. It's actually systematic. We do it with our populations, with our patients. Bad stress are those activities, behaviors, and thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and thoughts that are not under your control, not driven by your purpose, don't have clear timelines, don't have clear goals and victories. So they create this underlying a low-grade sympathetic overdrive that gets the cortisol going, your entire endocrine system is thrown out of whack, and you're in a survival state, not a thriving state. Imagine that for days, weeks, months, years. That becomes more damaging than anything else. So identify your bad stressor specifically. I don't like my job is not specific. I don't like this part of my job, which is me, typing letters every day. Well, you work towards eliminating, reducing, and empowering yourself out of that. Good stress are, this is beautiful. These are the behaviors, emotions, and activities that are driven by your purpose, have clear timelines and direction, and work your life towards that. That is a powerful central theme of our program, because without that, your dietary plan of the week will fall. Without that, the exercise program will fail, because stress will always overtake you. So definitely start that. Ours, restorative sleep. There's a whole thing, program we talk about with you guys as well, which is sleep. Those 8 hours are fundamental for cleansing the brain. If there is any cleanse, don't put these patches at the bottom of your feet or all these kind of weird stuff. Sleep deeply, sleep well. That cleans your brain better than anything else. And O is different for us. This is the thing that makes it different. O is optimizing brain capacity that grows the connections between neurons at a rate of 30,000 per neuron. That means activities that challenge you, that push you around your purpose. Learning a musical instrument, learning to dance, be in these kind of conversations with lovely people like you, volunteering, serving people of all these activities that are multidimensional, that are purpose-driven, and push your brain, grow your brain.
I love that. And it just struck me that everyone participating in this summit, you're optimizing your brain right now by learning and growing. And I often reflect that I think curiosity is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And when we're curious, when we're hungry to learn, it's like there's a power in that. And that's kind of how evolution happens, right? Like, do you think new thoughts, not just the same recycled ones, then that's how the neurons grow and expand and the connections expand, right? So I want to be thinking new things you've never thought before, seeing new things you've never seen before, and making connections you've never made before. That creativity is so important, and it brings us more alive. Thank you so much for all of the neuro steps. That's so important. Of course, we focus a lot here on the N, which is the first letter in there, nutrition, right? And I want to go a little deeper with you on some specific foods and their brain effects. And I want to start with coffee and tea and yerba mate and other of the caffeinated beverages. Can you tell us, are these good for our brains? Are they not? What do we know?
Well, the good news for tea and coffee lovers is that these beverages and specific food products have been proven to be good sources of antioxidants. And any food that has a lot of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory help us stay healthy, and it contributes to longevity as well. There are specific compounds in, say, for example, in green tea, EGCG, or catechins, and they have different names and colored compounds that essentially help our cells stay revived and healthy. They start fighting against oxygen reactant species, which are byproducts that are created because of life itself, because our cells, and specifically our brain cells, are so active and they work so hard. So there are a lot of byproducts that are created as a result of those activities, and there has to be a garbage disposal system or like a janitorial system that helps get rid of all of these byproducts to keep the environment healthy for the brain to grow and thrive. And green tea, black tea, yerba mate, and coffee provides these antioxidants. As a matter of fact, there have been some studies that show that, as unfortunate as it may sound, that there are regions in the West and specifically in the United States where people may not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables in underserved communities where, say, for example, buying blueberries is impossible because they're expensive or not available or not in season. And foods like tea or coffee can actually be a really important source of polyphenols and flavonols and antioxidants. Now, coffee also has caffeine, so it may not be for everyone. There are some individuals who may have some, for example, cardiac issues like arrhythmias or abnormal heart rates, or they may have anxiety, or they may have some issues that their bodies don't really react very well with coffee or caffeinated beverages, and it might put some pressure on their heart, so they have to be very careful. But just because that one population may have some difficulty doesn't mean coffee is bad. You hear this often in the internet, on social media, that coffee can be something that might increase dependency, and anything that may create dependency may not be good for health. And I think it's important for us to look at the nuance of the data. There have been studies that show that, in some populations, up to 4 cups of coffee may actually be associated with lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. We have specific data that shows that consumption of green tea, up to 3 or 4 cups per day, may be associated with lower risk of vascular dementia, Parkinson's disease, and Alzheimer's disease as well. So overall, these are healthy beverages. They are great sources of polyphenols and antioxidants, but every individual should look at themselves, see if they have any risk factors that these beverages may not be good for them, and then decide whether they should consume it or not. Yeah, unfortunately, the energy drinks, for most part, I know that there are new ones popping up in the store, and we're always busy in our community answering questions, but for the most part, they're all very concentrated sources of caffeine, and they have other ingredients that mixed in them, sometimes specific types of amino acids, and sometimes a lot of sugar in them, and they may not actually be healthy. Some people may not be ready for consumption of so much caffeinated product at once, and our body doesn't have the mechanisms of dealing with this much all of a sudden. So we don't really encourage that. But again, it's important for people to look at their risk factors and make a decision.
Thank you. And it makes sense, if you're going to consume caffeine, why not get it with all the antioxidants and the polyphenols and all the other wonderful compounds that come in the tea and the coffee? If you just isolate it out and then add a bunch of sugar, are you really getting health benefits? Probably not. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the food groups that are super, super healthy, starting with leafy greens. You touched on them a little bit earlier, but can you tell us about some of the health-promoting properties of leafy greens and the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, and the fiber that they contain?
Oh my goodness, where do we start? Dina and I are very cautious with words and using concepts because, when you are given that opportunity to be a voice for evidence-based medicine, you have to kind of be very careful about using the concept of superfood. So we say, no, dietary patterns are important. You can't just eat blueberries and call it a day, and then you can eat whatever you want. So there's no such thing as superfood, but I have to retract sometimes that statement and say, if there's any superfood, it might have to be leafy green vegetables because they are so incredible. And whenever you look at dietary patterns, at the core, the foods that have the highest anti-inflammatory indices are leafy green vegetables. And that's because of their phenomenal array of polyphenols and antioxidants and other anti-inflammatory products like camphorol. And I could go on and describe all the different names, but they're just so potent, and they're low in calorie, and they're high in fiber, and they have potassium, and they have selenium, and they have zinc and different vitamins. And they're just beautiful iron, and they're beautiful concoction of necessary minerals and vitamins and fiber and anti-inflammatory products that essentially fight against inflammation. And we know that one of the pathways to neurodegenerative diseases is inflammation, and inflammation is fought by leafy green vegetables. And we've seen in long-term, great prospective studies ones that have been done long time ago and the ones that were conducted recently, that people who consume even one serving of green leafy vegetables per day, which is about a cup and a half of raw and maybe half a cup of cooked green leafy vegetables, that's nothing. That's just fits in the palm of your hand. If people consume that much, their brains are 11 years younger compared to those who don't consume leafy green vegetables. And this is both by neuroimaging terms, so visually, and by neuropathological terms when they look at cellular function. That's amazing. There's no medicine out there that actually does that. And so, yes, if people can consume green leafy vegetables, they are well off and they can stay protected and their brain's going to function so well.
In fact, when we work in populations, one of the first things we actually add, and we do it very systematically to make sure that behavior change is sticky and it becomes permanent, is leafy green vegetables. And it's because it's the most powerful by far.
I just want to land the plane here for folks watching. Think about this for a second. If there was some new drug that could push Alzheimer's off 11 years, what would that be worth? About half the population over age 85 will die with Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia. And imagine if we jump that to 96, most people wouldn't get it at that point, right? Or would have so much more years of vibrancy and health. And that's just from one food, And by the way, for the record, the amount of leafy greens in that study that people were actually consuming in the most leafy greens group that got 11 more years of healthy brain life wasn't that much. Like, the amount that we probably should be eating is vastly more than that for optimal health. So what does that do for us? Okay, let's move on to mushrooms. Fungi are pretty fabulous. Can you tell us about their immune boosting and anti-inflammatory properties?
Definitely. Mushrooms are, they have to be one of my favorite foods, and they are delicious. And with that deliciousness comes so many health benefits. They are phenomenal sources of antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. They're also great sources of vitamin D, especially if some mushrooms are exposed to sunlight. They have more vitamin D in them. They are phenomenal sources of fiber and so many minerals and micronutrients that help keep us healthy. And people who eat mushrooms on a regular basis have lower risk of infections and inflammatory conditions. And also, they serve as a great food for keeping us healthy. Specifically for brain health, there were a couple of studies that were done that showed that people who consume mushrooms on a regular basis have lower risk of developing neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease. And it makes sense because sometimes, when you replace certain unhealthy foods, like for example, when people are used to the texture of meat and they replace that with mushrooms, not only does it taste good, but you're actually consuming all of these healthy elements that are found in mushrooms. And so people live longer, they live healthier, and they have healthy brains.
Can you tell us about some of the unique nutritional benefits and flavors in the different varieties of mushrooms? And from a culinary standpoint, are there some that you think are best or most useful? And also nutritionally, do we need to get the really expensive ones, or are button mushrooms good too?
Well, the good news is that as far as its nutritional profile is concerned, most mushrooms essentially fall in the same spectrum. I think the different kinds of mushrooms that are found in the market they vary based on, of course, their availability, their growth, and their texture as well. Specific mushrooms like lion's mane mushroom and shiitake mushroom, there were a couple of studies that have looked at their benefits for brain health. And I have to be honest, the results were not earth-shatteringly different, even though there's this notion that, mushrooms reduce the risk of cognitive impairment. The studies were very small. So for example, the lion's mane mushroom was studied in a group of 30 individuals. It was only studied in Japan. And when people consumed a whole lot of lion's mane mushroom, it showed that it made a difference in their cognitive scoring system. But I wouldn't really bank on that. I wouldn't use that study to say mushrooms are good for you. We have plenty of other studies that show that mushrooms have been associated with better vascular risk markers, so better cholesterol, better blood pressure, and things of that nature. So I would eat it because of that, because we know that blood pressure, cholesterol, and glucose abnormalities or glucose metabolism abnormalities like prediabetes and diabetes have been associated with Alzheimer's disease. So to improve those vascular markers, we should be consuming mushrooms. But anything that people can have access to, whether it's canned button mushrooms or the regular white mushrooms that are found in the stores, baby bella mushrooms, those are great. Of course, shiitake mushrooms are my favorite. They have such an amazing texture, and they don't disappear. They kind of give this meaty texture in soups and stews and in burgers and in different kind of sector. We make a really nice mushroom shawarma from portobello mushrooms and shiitake. So those are really delicious, but any type of mushroom is great. And if people can have access to it, they should go for it.
Fabulous. For those who don't know, by the way, Ayesha is not just one of the world's top neurologists, along with her husband, Dean. She's also a plant-based certified chef. So she knows what she's talking about when she's talking about culinary uses here. Let's talk about legumes, beans, lentils, peas. Are they good sources of protein, fiber, and essential nutrients?
Yes, absolutely, they are. And it is at the cornerstone of most of the dietary patterns that have been associated with better brain health. So whether it's Mediterranean diet or DASH diet or prudent diet or the Mayan diet, people who consume beans and legumes in general have better brain health and, of course, better vascular risk factor markers. We know from different studies that when people consume beans, they have better cholesterol profile. And we know that people who have high LDL cholesterol that are at higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. So if something improves your LDL, go for it. And beans definitely do that. They do that short term and long term. So even after eating one meal that has beans in it, we see better cholesterol and glucose markers. And long term, of course, people have better cholesterol profile and better vascular risk factor profile with it too. And, there's this notion that beans, because they're cheap and they're widely available, nobody really gives them a lot of credit. I think the most humble of superfoods are beans and lentils. They're available. They have, all of the amino acids that essentially make a perfect protein. The quality of protein really is not an issue at all. Some people think that meat are better quality than beans. They're not. They're absolutely not. You can actually consume lentils and meet all of your needs and all of your requirements and live a very healthy life.
Thank you. Fabulous. Now, a lot of people think about beans and they maybe think about baked beans or burritos, but are any other ideas for how to incorporate legumes into our diets that people might not be thinking about?
Oh, yes. I mean, Ocean, if we opened that door of recipes and food creation, I would probably have to talk with you for hours and hours. There's so many amazing ways of incorporating beans for people who may not be used to, eating a lot of legumes. We always suggest starting with the smallest size of beans. So starting with, say, for example, red lentils, starting with, the French puy beans or lentils, starting with maybe some chickpeas that may be easier on their gut microbiome compared to broad beans or bigger beans that may potentially cause more indigestions because of gas. Initially, because people need to build their gut to be able to break down all that fiber. Just to give you some examples, we make a really nice soup out of lentils. You can make soups, you can make curries, you can make sauces, you can blend beans and make an amazing pasta sauce. We actually make, pasta sauces from cannellini beans. You can make incredible burgers. You can add beans to your dessert. We've actually made black bean brownies with dates and cocoa powder and hemp seeds. They're high in protein, high in fiber, and nobody ever finds out that they're black beans in a dessert. And so there are multiple ways to use beans. And I think, following some of the recipes that you provide on your amazing, incredible website and some of the ones that we've actually contributed to the Healthy Brain course, people will find out that there's so many ways that you can incorporate these exceptionally amazing foods.
We had a Halloween party for our kids, Sophie's classmates. She's the president of her group. And so 40 students came and
Yes.
mac and cheese. And the cheese was the white sauce.
Yeah, we made mac and cheese.
nobody knew that this was a healthy mac and cheese. Nobody knew. And
white
they were imagine kids taking food home. That's how good it was. So I know she's my wife, but it was just absolutely remarkable.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Last but not least, spices. Can you tell us about some of your favorite spices for their medicinal and also culinary qualities?
I'm so glad you asked, because pound for pound, spices have so many anti-inflammatory and antioxidant compounds, and when people consume them on a regular basis, not only does it improve their health, but it also improves the taste and the flavors in their diet, and they're actually more likely to eat flavorful foods. All spices are incredible. Things like, for example, cumin and paprika and different types of herbs, all of them are incredible. The one spice that has been studied, and Dean and I were fortunate to have the opportunity to study it when we were the directors of brain health at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, was turmeric. So turmeric has a compound called curcumin, which is the active part, one of the active parts of turmeric. There's so many other ones that haven't really been studied as of yet, 4,000 compounds in turmeric. But curcumin seems to be a very potent antioxidant compound that passes through the blood-brain barrier. And it essentially has a proclivity for binding with amyloid beta protein, which is the bad protein that has been associated with Alzheimer's disease. And now subsequent studies are showing that it may potentially take off some of that amyloid beta protein from around the neurons. So it actually decreases the amyloid load in the brain. And we studied it by giving patients large doses of curcumin and studying the passing of curcumin through the blood-brain barrier in the retina. So retina, or the back of the eye, is an extension of the brain. And we saw curcumin depositing in the retina. And so from those studies and subsequent studies, we know that consumption of turmeric is associated with improved vascular markers, lower inflammation, and potentially lowering the load of amyloid beta protein in the brain. And amyloid beta protein continues to be formed in our brain. It's the reduction or getting rid of it that is the major problem as we age, and that has been associated with Alzheimer's disease. So, we propose adding turmeric to beverages. Like we love having some golden milk. We add, a little bit of turmeric with soy milk or almond milk, and maybe some cinnamon, some black pepper that increases its bioavailability by 2,000%. Adding it into curries, into sauces, into stews. Those are wonderful ways of adding them to our foods.
Fabulous. All right. Thank you both so much, everybody. We've been talking here with Doctors Dean and Ayesha Sherzai, husband and wife neuroscientists, best-selling authors, hosts of the Brain Health Revolution podcast. Dean and Ayesha, thank you so much for your decades of research and leadership in this field, for helping uplift the health of millions of people, for pointing a light of possibility that we could render Alzheimer's disease rare and have more clarity, more joy, more fulfillment, more ability to remember the things that matter most, more love, and more purpose in our lives. You are such inspirations to me and to so many others, and I thank you for your visionary leadership and for your partnership in the food revolution.
Thank you so much, Ocean. We love you. Thank you for providing this wonderful platform and sharing evidence-based information with the audience and with everyone. And we're so grateful to call you our friend and our chosen family.
Thank you.